This man has fallen in love with this idea of himself as a woman. There's no part for you, no part for wives or children in that dynamic.
I'm Jane.
Hello, my name's Emma Thomas, and I founded Children of Transitioners in 2019.
And I'm Bex.
And this is
Insightful Sisters.
Hello. We're so lucky tonight to welcome our guest, Emma Thomas, for this episode. When Emma was 11, her father told her that he was a transsexual. And for the next 7 years, she lived with him and lived with him while he went through that transition. And then later, as an adult, Emma set up the Children of Transitioners. So we're really glad to have you tonight, Emma. Thank you so much for coming to talk to us.
Thank you. Hello.
I've been incredibly moved by reading your story, reading your blogs, listening to you talking. It's so incredibly moving. You write about what happened to you, you talk about what happened to you. One of the things that really brought a tear to my eye was when you write this speech to your father in your head. You do that over and over again. And one of the things you said that you wanted to say to him was, you loved this more than you loved me. How was that as a child, living with that feeling?
It was really, really strange. And really, when I left, when I was 18 years old and I went to university, to be honest, I kind of had a very difficult experience at university. And my 20s were really chaotic and I didn't have boundaries. So I kind of buried all of these feelings about what happened to me. I denied it, or I didn't tell people. I became a teacher and I just worked like 70-hour weeks and didn't think about it and didn't think about it and didn't think about it. And it was very, very painful when I sort of became interested in this subject, started turfing, so to speak. And fortunately for me, feminism was there, feminist writers were there, and I was able to put a perspective on this and really look back at what had happened. And, given terms like ambiguous loss, this realization, I think also because other children transitioners talk about the same thing and trans widows talk about the same thing, which is this sense of grief. It was so difficult really to kind of bring these feelings back and look at them and process them. But it has actually been healing. What's been amazing to me is meeting people who've had similar experiences, and we can start talking about patterns then, speaking to trans widows, speaking to children transitioners, and you see there's a certain cohort of men that are doing the same behaviors again and again. And I think anyone who's kind of involved in feminist activism gets this, that survivors meet and they talk and they share, and there's a huge power in that.
I mean, so often on this, just the few weeks, really, few months that we've been doing this podcast, we've met so many women who've found comfort in the support and love of other women. That phrase, you love this more than you love me, it shone another new light on it for me, because I thought this is like any addiction and I thought addiction and not selfish behavior, but self-absorption.
Yes. So when we talk about autogynephilia, technically this is the idea that he has fallen in love with the woman that he sees in the mirror. And this is when you see these men posting these pictures of themselves as if they're the most beautiful woman in the world. And they're posing as if they think they're incredibly sexy and incredibly gorgeous. And you see a lot of people on X mocking that, because you can see how strange this is. This man has fallen in love with this idea of himself as a woman. There's no part for you, no part for wives or children in that dynamic. It is Narcissus in love with the mirror, in love with the reflection. You are pushed aside, and that's where the grief comes in, because you've lost that person. But then the paradox is, with my dad, he says that time that I was your dad and you loved me, that uncomplicated time was all a lie. And I wasn't happy. And now I'm happy. But he's happy, but you're not in there.
So you lose not just the present, but you lose the past as well,
Yes.
don't you?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm not the only one who has so few pictures of my childhood.
Mm.
You know, so many were destroyed, or my dad wouldn't pose for them. I have a few that my grandparents kept, a few that my mum kept, but I haven't, nothing.
Is it true to say that you've got more cynical about your father's behaviour as you've grown older?
Oh yeah, absolutely. And also the politics of it, because I mean, I went through a process that I think a lot of women will recognize. So I would have said 10 years ago, unthinking, if somebody had come to me and say, are you an ally to transsexuals? And I said, yes, absolutely. And what's happened to me has been what's happened to a lot of women, which is an education. Discovering, I mean, I had no idea what autogynephilia was. I had no words to describe what happened to my father. The words were what he gave me. So I was actually parroting this idea of a female brain in a male body. And it wasn't until I was reading women going, what the hell does that mean? That it even sort of occurred to me that this was a ridiculous thing to say. I just believed it. He was my father. He was a person in authority. He'd seen psychiatrists. He said this about himself as if this was the truth.
All that time ago, did people take him at his word, or was there a lot of pushback? Because this was in the 80s, wasn't it?
Yeah, yeah, it was. Part of the problem was my experience was, I was a child, so the world was being mediated through my
Of
father.
course, yeah.
So, for example, he was on secondment for his job. He told me that his employer was allowing him to stay at home and giving him money because he was a genius. And they couldn't let him go because he was so important to them and he was a genius. And the reality, I found out much later, was that none of the women in his office wanted him in the toilets. And so they were saying, you can't have this person here if they're using the women's toilets. See, that was back in the day when you could actually say that.
Yes, we're getting there again.
Yes, we are getting back to that. And that's something that I think is really interesting. There was a lot going on that I didn't know, basically.
Yeah.
And I mean, it would be interesting to know more about what was going on for the people around.
And you set up the website in 2019, and you could see that this was a need then, but I think really in the future, this is going to be a huge need. Are you seeing lots of similar stories to you? Are there any sort of threads or patterns you can immediately relate to?
One of the interesting things, and I set up this website and I thought that I would just really be talking to a lot of, a small number of people my age who'd had a fairly similar experience. But then as I started looking more into it, you suddenly see how many of these men are now in the public forum calling themselves mothers, talking about their kids, how many kids are appearing in the media. So, for example, Will and Harper, there are children in that. Emilia Perez, the film that's currently nominated for an Oscar, has children. Right? He's trans, he has children and a wife. This is now in mainstream media that these people are, and certainly I'm seeing all kinds of really strange, interesting relationships that are out there. So some really odd cases that are coming out. There was a very odd one in the United States where police were called, there was a dead body, there were 5 children, and everyone in the flat was trans. There were like 5 men who were trans identified, and one of them was dead. So what happened? That case has been completely buried. But what was going on with those children? Why were they there?
The men tried to hide the fact, didn't they, that
That's
there were
right.
children in the flat?
Yeah, the children were hidden in the room in the back, while the others were there with the body. I mean, you're kind of wondering about the lives that children are having. The point that I'm making when I talk about these, and I've written quite extensively about the worst case scenarios, where there's sex offenders. I mean, Karen White had 2 children, right? So sex offenders in prison who have kids. right,
Mhm.
and they're trans, is, I believe, because what we're seeing from this reporting, where the report was changed and things like that, a kind of two-tier issue happening
Yeah.
where the children of trans people are somehow not having the same safeguarding that other children would. And information about what's going on with them is being recorded in different ways. So, what happened to those kids? How was that recorded? Those kind of things. Why on earth did these men have these children? Where were the mothers? All of these questions, but we will not know. And I think there are safeguarding issues that
Yeah.
come up here.
Yeah.
So lots and lots of children of trans people, particularly when their dad's trans when they're older, I'm sure have all right experiences of various different
Yeah.
kinds. And, some of them, have even quite friendly relationships with their fathers when their fathers are doing this, and you come to terms with it, and all kinds of things happen. I've seen pictures, particularly pictures of weddings. Weddings seem to be a big thing for trans-identified fathers because they get to dress up and have pictures taken. So that's a
Yeah.
thing. And you see a lot of wedding pictures and people seem okay. But there are these really strange cases, and I'm just not seeing an oversight.
No.
And that worries me.
Yes.
I wasn't even aware of it when I started,
No.
the website. I was really wanting to talk about my feelings. So my first few, if you go and look at it, the first few essays are really about my feelings, how things went happen, like when I was a kid, how we were homeless for a while, all these kind of things. And then later it becomes much more political because you're thinking, hang on a minute, they're using the courts, the College of Policing, using the police to enforce special rules on the families of trans people to get them to cooperate with these men, to use the language that's pre-approved, to refer to them in particular ways. You are abusing your father if you do not wholeheartedly affirm pronouns, everything. The College of Police will consider you an abuser if you don't do that. And I'm thinking, this is how coercive control happens. Why is that being allowed with the families of trans people and not with other people?
Yeah. I mean, the spousal veto,
The spouse, exactly.
the right of a woman to opt out. What it's making me think is that when you said two-tier, it's so hypocritical, really, when you think that child safeguarding, the number one thing is that it's got to be child-centered. What does the
Yes.
child need? What does the world look like from this child's viewpoint?
Yeah. So it can be very destabilized when your father is behaving in particular ways, when your father started to behave in certain ways. Your own identity can be destabilized, particularly if it happens at key moments in your development. So we're certainly seeing lots of children of trans parents identifying as trans, identifying as non-binary, and things like that. Why is that happening? I've got lots of theories about a kind of queer culture that has emerged where, the whole idea is that you're part of a queer family and your identity is destabilized by that. You certainly see here and in the US extended networks of people where a child can go through life and just go to queer events, right? Go to prides, go to meetings, and really just have that enforced that you're part of a parallel culture. And one thing that I'm wondering is, where is the safeguarding in that? Because there's a lot of sexualized stuff happening.
Yes, yeah.
You're exposed to quite a lot. I was, and my dad wasn't even particularly extreme. But I saw sissy porn. I saw the Beaumont Society newsletters and things like that. I know that there are children who see much worse, who are exposed to fathers dressing in hypersexualized ways. This is a sexual thing. What the police knew in the past, what social workers knew in the past, was this was a sexual thing, transvestic fetishism. But now it's a civil liberties issue, and you can see there's a lot of capture in organisations, which I can talk about a bit more. But the NSPCC, the College of Policing.
Well, I think we'll be straying into Bex's questions then, and she tells me off if I do that. So But one thing that's striking me is that what you describe is almost classically a cult, isn't it? You know,
Yes,
the
yeah,
language
absolutely.
being restricted, your behaviour, you're being told to say certain things, believe certain things, the truth is kept from you. But unlike any other cult, when you try and break out of it, the people outside of your family circle, the authorities, are shepherding you back towards it.
Yes, I mean, they're also using the language of the cult,
Yeah.
which is the thing that I find really worrying because you think, okay, well, maybe schools will be objective, but schools have got pride flags everywhere. Schools are policing pronouns. I actually have anecdotal evidence of that, of children being told that they should change their pronouns if they refer to their dad as their dad. Like even if the dad's okay with it, the schools are enforcing it. So you think, okay, well, you go maybe a hospital, but the hospitals are enforcing it. You might think, okay, I'm being abused, I'll talk to the police, but the police are enforcing it. I mean, I can't, for a long time, you just couldn't move without seeing images of the police with pride flags everywhere, trans flags at trans events, harassing women for hate crimes, for saying anything that they disapprove of. That is a kind of like state enforced cult. And you're kind of thinking, well, where is a place that someone can go? Can they go to the NSPCC? No, they can't because that's captured. This was the horror that, we realized. I got joined by a few people and we were sort of looking at these things over time and thinking, oh my God, the College of Policing is saying that you're being abusive, saying that women are being abusive if they don't give their husbands money or allow them to have money for makeup, clothing, etc.
Mm.
When financial abuse is really, really a common thread.
Yeah.
That, I mean, certainly, my experience that my dad, a lot of money was going on clothes. This is the priority.
Yeah, it's the
Right?
self-absorption again,
The
isn't it?
self-absorption, the feelings of the man are far more important. And, and to be honest, I think with trans-identified women as well, there's a lot of support in prioritizing your feelings
Yeah.
over just the basic health of a baby. We saw with the Sally Hines paper where basically women were told to keep taking testosterone throughout the pregnancy because saying that you don't want a baby with a DSD was prejudiced against people with DSDs. And you don't want to upset your gender dysphoria for the health of the baby.
Yeah.
We can say, well, there's no evidence of, testosterone use and things, but we
No,
do.
but given that
From East
women have been
Germany.
made to feel guilty about having paracetamol and alcohol during pregnancy.
Do you remember that thing? I remember things. I've never had a baby, but I mean, the things that I've read over the years, like you must never be depressed or angry while you're pregnant because the baby will feel
Good
it.
luck
Remember when
with
you had to
that.
play Mozart to the fetus?
Yeah.
And,
Yeah.
I mean, the shock that we get now when we see a pregnant woman smoking or drinking,
Yeah.
because it's become so taboo.
I wanted to ask you about training, because we've talked about the fact that there are these sort of tensions inside all this, what should be the supportive services. And there's this huge safeguarding issue. We seem to have strayed away from having the child at the centre. What sort of training do you think social workers need in order to safeguard properly? Because at the moment, the training all seems to be going in one direction. It's all about acceptance. What do they need to think about for the children who are being brought up in these marriages, which are often marriages that are also dealing with marital breakdown as well?
Absolutely. I mean, these are people in crisis in the first place, but then you have well-intentioned social workers, well-intentioned people who are just completely not focused on the welfare of women and children. Now, I think it's really difficult to express just how toxic Stonewall's influence has been over these organisations. I mean, it really is. So can we reverse Stonewall, get back to objective, evidence-based, help? Social workers 20 odd years ago, social workers knew all this stuff. So it's not like it's new to them. It was established. People did know about sexual offending and transvestic fetishism. People did know that it's probably what the number one fetish of sex offenders. People were aware of these things. The police and the social workers were definitely aware of these things. So I somehow need the old school people to come back and train the new school people, because it has been shocking, isn't it? Schools, everybody is so captured. I don't know how to reverse it.
Hi, Emma.
Hello, Bex.
Hi. So you've spoken there a little bit about capture of statutory services and how much of a barrier that can be to people who need support. I want to talk a little bit about the capture of our media as well, because we hear an awful lot of stories, don't we, about how life-changing transition is for the individual, but we seem to be so unwilling to recognise that that is also hugely impactful for partners and children, and that it can be very disruptive to their lives. Why is that?
I think in a general way, when you think about the media, people love transition stories. Everybody loves, the huge weight losses and the freaky plastic surgery and all that kind of thing. So there's something just fascinating to a lot of people about trans, particularly transsexuals, their operations, those kind of things. So they're the center. And I think men in particular are so shocked by transition because they can't imagine wanting to be a woman, right? For a lot of them, being a woman would be a humiliating thing. It's in language, isn't it? That being a woman is less than, men dress up as women for pranks and parties and things like that, and the fake breasts and all that kind of thing. Drag queens. There's something about dressing as a woman which is seen as mockery. It's inferior and things like that. So there's a fascination, and we're not particularly interesting, right? Someone else is dressing up, someone else is transitioning, and I think this has been what's been interesting for me. Is what I love about feminist analysis is that feminists look at these pictures and go, well, what's happening to these women over at the side? What's going on with them? And what's been really lovely is the sisterhood that has listened. And Vaishnavi Sundar's amazing film, which I'm in, Behind the Looking Glass, was the first time that we're in a film and we have a voice. And there were so many films about the men who transition and the women who transition. There are loads of media about them.
Absolutely. And I'm so glad you've mentioned Behind the Looking Glass, because I really wanted to ask you about that. It does seem that this has captured a snapshot of children of transitioners' voices at a time in history where they are more silenced than ever. Can you talk about the impact that that has had on the community and the impact that you think it will have in the future too?
I know, and I love it. And I love that it's proper feminist filmmaking. It actually listens to women and it centers our voices. There's no man there giving a narrative about what's happening. It is just us talking and Vaishnavi listening and explaining. It's a lovely, lovely piece of filmmaking. And it was a lovely experience to be part of it, and I felt for her because she had all our voices in her head for months and months and months, so when I finally met her in person, because we did an interview via Zoom, it was like she'd known me for so long, and it was lovely. The reception to the film's been terrific, but it got demonetized on YouTube. But I think having our voice there, you're right. I think it's historically important. I love it so much.
Yeah, it's an absolutely beautiful piece of work. You spoke to Jane earlier about common threads and trends in the behaviour of trans parents. I'm interested if you've seen any changes in the experiences of children, particularly with the changes brought about by the internet, social media's involvement, and changing social narratives and attitudes towards trans people. Do you feel that that's having an impact on younger children of transitioners now?
Well, yeah, I mean, So when I was a kid, obviously having a trans parent was something that you did not speak about. I had no idea how I could talk about it at school. I know my teachers knew, but how could I even start to talk about it with other kids at school? So I was very, very silent about it. So now you can see that kids are going to school, their fathers or their mothers are coming to the school gates, right? So the trans status of their parents is very open. And in some ways that's good, right? Because you don't have that sense of shame. But on the other hand, there's other things where there's just automatic affirmation of the parent. I think there's probably always the sense of a freakishness that, no matter how lovely other people are, that there's something really odd about your family. I mean, maybe not, but I do think there's a kind of natural something going on. When I look back, I mean, no one at my school ever came to our house. No one at school ever came anywhere near us. I wasn't allowed to be an exchange student because they couldn't come back to our house. You do kind of wonder what that's like for those kids. But there are also organisations, there's Collage in the US, for example, which seeks to normalise this for kids. I think they're well intentioned, but I don't think that what they're doing is good, because it's not questioning, and it is just telling these kids that everything that's going on with them is something that they should accept.
Yeah, yeah. And I think it's difficult with social media, isn't it? Because on the one hand, it's made it easier than ever for young people in these situations to find support and find people going through similar situations themselves. But on the other hand, there's an awfully strong narrative that centers the trans person's affirmation above even the needs or safety of their family. And you spoke briefly about trans identified men wanting to breastfeed and trans identified women continuing to take their hormones through pregnancy, despite the fact that it could very likely be harmful to the development of the baby. Why are we so comfortable setting aside the needs and safety of everyone else for these individuals?
Well, God, I wish I knew, because I think it's come to just a horrible situation, haven't we, where it's split the Lecce League, where between the people who are okay with men taking dangerous medication in order to lactate, feeding their babies that lactation, and the women who are saying that doesn't seem like a good idea, who've been ousted, from one of the most respected breastfeeding organizations in the world. And that this seems crazy to me. There is an objective truth here that I can't think of any situation in which it's okay for a man to put his nipple in a baby's mouth. It's not okay. And it's child abuse. And we have got to the point where child abuse is okay. What concerns me, obviously, is it's as if you're a child of a trans person and it's okay to do that to you, because somehow you affirm the man and all the woman, right? And that's your point. That's what you're there for. You're just there for the affirmation. You have no agency of your own. You're not an individual human being. You exist to affirm. I mean, there's one case where it wasn't even a father, it was a grandfather who was helped to lactate into his grandchild's mouth. And the people writing the paper, who were all very, very supportive, were saying, oh, well, it's helped them bond. Well, my grandfather didn't need to do that to bond. And for God's sake, he bought me a bike. That's how we bonded. He taught me how to
Oh.
ride a bike. For God's sake. And there comes a point where you just think, this is so ridiculous. I remember before, there's something struck me that Helen Joyce said, where she said, I thought it would be enough to say they're castrating gay kids. And everyone would go, oh no, that's horrific. We must stop that. And then nobody stopped it. And I think we're in this situation where we say men are putting their nipples in babies' mouths and getting off on it in public, and the NHS is helping. And you think people would say, that's very bad. We should stop that. And we've spoken to the NHS, and quite a lot of hospital trusts said, no, we're not doing that. But some of them refused to respond to us. And there are definitely men in the UK who are doing this because they're doing it publicly. So who's helping them?
It's so concerning. And it does make you wonder as well, what would their response be if the children or partners of these men approached them asking for help? For children of transitioners who are maybe realizing within themselves, I'm not okay with this and there's something not right here. Do you feel that there are barriers that are blocking them from asking for help or getting help?
Yeah, so I mean, this is the very difficult thing, because we have so much capture of social workers of the NSPCC. Like I said, we've complained to the Charity Commission about the NSPCC and nothing, absolutely nothing. But how are they supporting children? Right? If they're not supporting the children of trans people, if they, and the same, the police were, all of these organisations, this has been our horror, is discovering how many of these organisations are so captured by their Stonewall training. They're afraid, I think. We're actually seeing, agencies that are supporting fostering by trans identified men and adoption by trans identified men. Because now, of course, gay families are old fashioned. The new thing is trans people adopting and fostering, with no thought about this, with no thought about what the paraphilias are, with no thought about what ortogynephilia is. And what happens to those children?
I think it's so true as well what you say. We've known for a long time that these paraphilias exist. Whichever name you call it by, whether it's cross-dressing, transvesticism, AGP, the fact is we've known for a long time that some men do get off on this.
Thank you for sort of saying that. About the thing about the language is we have a lot of words, and I notice that a lot of people lately are going, oh, well, actually, these people aren't ortogynephiles, or these people are these people. And, there's all this kind of thing where the language gets obfuscated. And so it becomes more difficult for us to say, well, this cohort. So we were talking about ortogynephiles. A lot of the time when I'm talking about late stage transitioners, I'm talking about ortogynephiles, and we have recognized behavior in that, like rage, shame, fueled anger, all of those kind of things that come as part of that condition. But you'll get someone who'll say, no, they're not ortogynephiles, they're just transvestites, or they're transsexuals and things like that. And actually, to be honest, there's a lot of words thrown about. Do I have to diagnose everybody who's on a genuine spectrum of transvestic fetishism? No, I can talk about behaviors which we see again and again, the narcissistic behaviors we see again and again, that impact hugely on women and children. The barriers are sometimes just in the language that we're allowed to use in describing what we're doing. So the courts, for example, that will make sure that you only use the pronouns that your father wants you to use. And I think one of the things that's been really interesting for us has just been, in the last few years, how much our language is controlled by all kinds of people. It's policed online. The number of times that I've seen children of trans people going on Reddit, going on TikTok, saying something, and then all of these people pounce on them. You're not saying the right thing. How dare you say that? That's transphobic. The word transphobic becomes this thing you can't possibly be, how evil you are. I mean, I've been to Let Women Speak events. I've been shouted at. I've had the most weird things said to me, things thrown at me. The violence at some of these events it's insane. I mean, the things that have been written to me, the things that I've been called just for trying to talk about this.
I mean, you speak about language there, and I think as well, something that's really concerning is we talk so much about dog whistles and how for people who have been victimized or who have faced a particular form of abuse or hate, even a seemingly innocuous turn of phrase or word can be a dog whistle to them that lets them know they're not safe in that environment or they're not safe with that individual. And I think for young people who are going through courts or speaking to the police where there have been issues, maybe even beyond custody and more serious issues, we're not really considering how it must read to them when they're asked to use that individual's pronouns. It's so important for victims of any form of violence to be able to describe what's happened to them in the way that makes sense to them and using their own words and freedom of expression. It must read as very hostile for these young people to be immediately corrected. I worry that they must have moments where they think right out of the gate, oh God, they're on his side.
Yeah, absolutely.
You've done an awful lot of incredible work to draw attention to these stories and to elevate these voices and provide a space for children of transitioners who are going through these things. Do you think the tide is turning? Do you think people are becoming more aware?
Yeah, I hope the tide is turning. I think what's happening in the US is really interesting. Um, so, time of recording, President Trump has, you know, enacted this executive order that basically, I think actually pulls back even what transsexuals had, before the trans lobby kind of pushed very, very far. Where that leaves the children of those trans people who had thought that they had all these rights to do all these different things, I think is interesting, remembering that we were talking about being in a cult. What happens to cults when they think they're under attack is there's a lot of stress, and I'm worried about those kids. I think that's, in those kind of queer networks and things like that. I mean, already I noticed that Collage is bringing in security in on its emails and things like that. It's not going to be as open about who's a trans parent, for example. So something's happening there. We've got a huge amount to do in the UK. We really do, about all these organisations. And we had some help from the Conservative government. We have MPs in all the different parties who are sympathetic, but I am really concerned about the Labour government because of the trans activists in there, that even like the basic things that we've won, issues with the GRA and things like that, those are always concerns, and we've got so much to fight for here. Women's rights are not won just because the Cass report came out. We've got a long way to go. Personally, I spoke a while ago at the Women's Declaration Conference with Tinsel Angel. Hopefully we'll be doing some more. Vaishnavi's film is being shown in Slovakia on mainstream television, which is really amazing. And she's going to Australia and New Zealand. There are going to be some screenings there. So I think this issue is going wider and wider. I'm really happy about that.
For women who are concerned about this issue or who want to help, are there things that they can do? Are there steps that they can take to get more involved?
If you're involved in public services at all, I appreciate it's really difficult for people where they are with their jobs and things like that. But, if you're a social worker, you're a therapist, there are ways that you can help children of transitioners. I think we've actually got articles on the website about how you can help. And obviously, you can write to your MP and things like that, in support of single sex services. I'm in the Avon and Somerset region. We actually have no refuges, no single sex services. Hospitals will not guarantee you single sex ward. I was hospitalised last year and I found myself on a mixed ward. I threw a huge fuss and they moved the guys out. But I was shocked, absolutely shocked. There are no single sex services at all, like to support women.
The support for trans rights has been so immediate and so devout that some cynical part of me, I have to confess, does wonder if there weren't a lot of people sat wanting to undo all of these rights and all this progress women have made, and trans rights has just been the convenient excuse that they can hide behind in order to do that. I mean, in my local area, there's not even a women's session at the swimming pool.
I mean, 100 years, right? 100 years from the women in the sashes and the pageants, the marching, just to get the vote. Like, for goodness sake, all of those things that we fought for the single sex services, all of it. I mean, all that time, you think of the domestic violence shelters and all of those things that women set up. And it took a few years to dismantle all of it. And women helped. So many women have helped. You look at Bristol, who's running those agencies that are making them mixed sex? What the hell?
It is so upsetting to think about that, and harrowing to see how easily it's all been done. For people who have never considered this perspective before, or who want to learn more about the experiences of children of transitioners, where's a good place to start?
Our website is childrenoftransitioners.org. There's also Trans Widows Voices, which is an amazing website full of real women's accounts. The Behind the Looking Glass is available on YouTube. Please go and watch it. Please go and support Vaishnavi and give us some money. There are ways to help.
Perfect. And we finish on the same question that we ask in each episode. Do you have a woman or women of the moment whose voices you'd like to highlight and draw attention to?
Well, Vaishnavi, of course, who's now in a couple of months going to Australia and New Zealand, and I hope she has an amazing time, meets amazing women. Uta Hagen, who's a trans widow, has just set up a Substack, and she has done the only research that is available on trans widows and children transitioners. So she's interviewed 61 trans widows so far. And I think there are about 32 kids who were mentioned as part of that. All of the research, apart from Uta's, is completely biased. It's all done by these researchers who basically want to support men in custody battles, right? So of those 32, 7 had suicidal ideation, those children. 4 of them had been hospitalized after suicide attempts. It's the only recording of any of that you will see. In all of those cases, their fathers refused to attend therapy and refused to visit them in hospital. That says a lot, I think. It really does. So, I mean, she's really worth supporting, because I think she's really passionate about recording and spreading information.
Emma, thank you so much for speaking to us, and thank you for sharing your women of the moment. 2 incredible women there. And thank you to our listeners for making it this far. We really hope that you've enjoyed this episode. If you have, please do like, comment, share, connect with us on social media so that you can keep in touch about future developments. We hope to see you in the next episode. Goodbye.